We were both going through our struggles, and we walked away with more than $1 million worth of personally guaranteed debt and a foreclosure. Between 2008 2009, that was probably the lowest time in my life. I wrote a suicide note at one point because I watched my wife walk out, during Christmas to go wait tables, because that's how broke we were.
Welcome back to another episode of the Austin Zabak Show. Today we have Steve Valentine on the show. Steve is an OG real estate investor, owns, like 80 plus rental properties now. He's a real estate agent. He helps people all around the country actually become successful real estate agents. And we've actually done quite a bit of business together over the years, or at least a handful of deals. Yep. And you work with a lot of really big names and really big people. And man, I'm just excited to have you on the show, and I appreciate you being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, man, I'm trying to think, dude. I did a deal with you early on, and you probably don't even remember. I don't even think I remember the deal. But pretty early on into my real estate career, I did some deals with you, and I actually did a couple deals with your dad back in the day.
Did you do some deals with my dad?
I did, yeah. And pretty crazy, And then we got to talking a lot more at the Cancer Society. Lindsay Schwartz was doing the thing, and
friend of ours.
Yeah, which is really cool. And we got to talking there, and I think I told you actually then. I was like, I need to get you on the pod. And here we are, like, way too long. It's been way too long.
6 months,
yeah,
right?
And we're finally here. So, man, I just appreciate you being here.
Absolutely.
So, for people who don't know you, talk to me a little bit about like where you are today, and then kind of how you got to where you're at today in the real estate world.
Yeah. So where we are today is that my belief and my goal right now is that this is going to sound crazy, right? The goal over the next 10 years is to impact 1 million agents, to help create $100 million in income and $1 billion worth of net worth.
Wow. It's a big
right?
goal.
So the reason for that is that it all stems back, a lot of people have heard this story. It all stems back to my dad passing, right? He had sudden terminal cancer at age 63. He died after doing all the trustee sale in 08, through 12, and built millions of dollars of portfolios. But he didn't get creative and do it for himself, right? So as real estate agents, my dad was in the business for 40 years. What if he had died just owning 5 homes, right? What would that have changed for my mom?
Sure.
Right? And so, I think that our real estate license is our greatest opportunity to create wealth. Yep. And a lot of times we get into the business thinking it's a great opportunity to earn income, and we don't see the other side of it. So, that's really the impact. And I believe that if more agents understood that and they were doing it for themselves, then they can help their clients do it as well, right? So now they're helping their clients not just sell things, they're helping them buy, they're helping them acquire, they're helping them build wealth, which, down the road, like, some of the people that were in my dad's classes, I've seen those people, right? 10 years later, and they're like, man, your dad changed my life, right? Because of this, right? Or some of his past clients that are generational clients for me, they're like, your dad talked us into keeping our house, and we're so glad. Like, we've got these missionaries that own 6 homes now, right? They were out of the country for the last 12 years, right? My dad convinced them to hold their first property, buy 5 more, and they did, and they just paid off 3 of them, right? What does that change for their family now?
Sure.
So that's really the goal, and as far as, where I came from, I've had my license since 99, and we're, almost 24 years into it. We've evolved and pivoted, 5 or 6 times. And I think we're finally on our last pivot, although it probably won't be. But we do the traditional side of the real estate business because we've got a big repeat referral. But then, I'm really known in the Phoenix market to be a problem solver, right? So with the agents and doing creative things and helping people get through problems and create a strategy for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I think of when I think of your name. I almost think of real estate investor first, probably.
Sure.
And then agent, which is interesting, because you just sold. I want to say you just sold, maybe not just, but you sold Chris and Lori Harder their house, and that was obviously a multi-million-dollar house in, I believe, PV or whatever. Yeah. So obviously you're a big agent too, but. I think of investor first, which is interesting, But really, I love the fact that you're talking about the creative world, though, and I love that. And I always tell my agents too. I'm like, guys, like most agents, they almost shouldn't even be an agent. Like you meet most agents. A lot of agents have never owned a home. Mm-hmm. They rent, right?
Yep.
They live in an apartment. They've never owned a home. They've never bought an investment property.
Right.
They've never flipped a home, right? And yet they're an agent. Like, they're representing buyers and sellers on making arguably the biggest investment of their life, right?
Right.
And I'm like, well, that doesn't make a ton of sense. Like, they don't even technically know what they're talking about. I mean, I get maybe they've done a ton of transactions and they've done their due diligence and they've done their research, but they've never done it.
Right.
You don't
want to hear the stat on the amount of real estate agents in the country that actually own a rental property?
Scary. I'd love to know.
It's less than 10%.
Really?
Less than 10%.
Wow. So and that's crazy. To add to that, think of that for a minute. Of the 1.8 or however many real
There's
estate
3 million active real estate. Well, that's licensees right now.
Out of the 3 million, right? Active licensees who supposedly should have the most knowledge of real estate of anybody in the country, right? Of the 300 million
Right.
or 330 million people, I guess half those people are children, so 180 million adults or whatever in the country. They should have the most knowledge of so you would think they had done the most rentals. If they have the most knowledge, then they should know, oh my gosh, real estate is arguably the best investment anybody could ever make in their lifetime. That and maybe the stock market, right? Depending on who you talk to. And yet they own 10%.
So let me ask you a question. What were you taught in real estate school about investing in real estate?
Nothing at all.
When you went to your first brokerage, what did anybody say about it?
Zip.
Right?
Zero. Nada.
So unless you're seeking it, you're not going to know about it. And, I mean, let's be honest, right? I mean, the greatest way to create wealth is by owning real estate, not selling it.
Agreed. Biggest mistake I think people make is selling real estate. I had a chance to, I went to the Jordan Peterson event not too long ago, and he was here, and I was up, and Brian Colhane and a bunch of guys got like a booth, like up in the, the top of the theater, and Robert Kiyosaki was in our booth. And so I was talking to Robert Kiyosaki, and he can't hear too well anymore. He's got a hearing aid. So I'm kind of like yelling, like trying to talk to him. And he asked me what I did for a living. And I said, I sell real estate, And he goes, what? And I thought he didn't hear me, right? But he actually did hear me. And he said, why do you do that? He's like, well, that's stupid. He's like, I've only sold 3 houses in my life, and I regret all 3. And so what he meant by that was like, you're an idiot for selling real estate.
Right.
Now, I don't think that, obviously it's good cash flow, right?
Sure.
And so, you have to make cash in the now. You can't just kick the ball forever.
Right.
How do you live, right? So I think there's a balance to it, but I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, the balance in, like our business structure right now, right, is that, we flip some homes. And we're not fly by night, right? We evolved into what we do. I mean, my wife and I have acquired almost 1,000 homes in the last 8 years. And we've flipped, I mean, she's renovated and flipped almost 800 homes in the last 8 years, right? But she's a licensed general contractor. She runs that side of the business. She has her team. Like, that's fantastic. We managed to keep about 80, 90 properties, right? They kind of come in and out depending on what we're doing with them. Yep. And then we've got our traditional side, but the traditional side leads to opportunity. Right? If you can go through with a client and figure out how to show them what the options are, right? I mean, it's kind of like when we renamed our company to Limitless Real Estate Strategies, because there's limitless strategies in every house and opportunity, but if you can get through it and understand it, you can actually help a client solve the problem, at the most convenient time, for them.
Which is so interesting, right? And so how did you get into, walk me through, like, you got your license in 99, right? And then walk me kind of through the journey of how you got to where you're at today and flipping that many and buying that many rentals. I mean, obviously, a lot happened between 99 and today. So what was the journey and what did the crash? How did the crash? I'd love to talk about that. And how did that impact you guys?
Are we allowed to swear?
Jacob will bleep it out at the
end. So here's the journey, right? And I'll try to make it short. So in 99, I got my license. This was after I was an automotive mechanic for 3 years, right? When I got out of high school. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to build cars and do all that fun stuff.
Cars, yeah.
Love cars, still do, right? It was a passion, always was. And in 99, or actually 98, somebody broke in and stole all my tools. Right, I worked for this fleet company. I got a $50,000 insurance check, and I was peace out to the automotive business. I went back to my dad. My dad said I could always, mentor under him if I ever wanted to. So I went back to my dad. I'm like, can I do this? He's like, go get your real estate license. So I worked for them doing odd jobs at $8 an hour. You know, luckily I had that 50 grand. So, you know, I worked over there doing things for him, and then got my real estate license, going to school at night, you know, 3 days a week. And it took me like 9 tries to pass the freaking test because I suck at test taking. And I joined my dad's team, right? But the way I learned was so different than how people learn today, right? And that they're willing to learn, right? My dad's like, look, I can help you create success if you will just give me 2 years and listen and watch what I'm doing.
Sure.
Right? So I would sit at the edge of my dad's desk and watch him just call people, talk to people, work through things, go on appointments with him. And so the first year I just kind of did that. And the second year I started working with buyers, right?
Hey, real quick, I just want you to do me a huge favor. If you're enjoying the show and you're enjoying all the amazing guests that we've been having on lately, then do me a massive favor and smash the like button, drop a comment down below, and subscribe if you have not already. I would greatly appreciate it. It would mean the world to me, and we will be able to bring on a lot more big names if you help us out. Now let's get back to the show.
So I'd take buyers out when they got to contract or wanted to write a contract. I'd go meet my dad at a Starbucks, and I'd watch my dad write the contract and ask the questions, right? And at the time, for the first 2 years, I was paid $500 a week plus gas money. That was my pay. I got no commissions. I got no cuts. I got nothing.
Yeah.
Right? The reason my dad did that, he's like, I don't want you to live on the real estate roller coaster. I don't want you to get your first commission check at age 20 and not know what to do with it, right? And then go take a vacation, right? Back then, I mean, we were selling $100,000 homes, so it wasn't like a huge check.
You wouldn't have been on a big vacation.
No. So that was the start, right? So I was on the team, and it was like 3 years into that before my dad started. So 04, right? We started to ramp up in 04 here. And my dad really started working with investors. And this is when the investors were coming out of the woodwork. My dad got one referral. One guy called him. His name was Evan Spinrod out in California. That guy worked for Farmers Insurance, and he came out and bought 10 homes cash, right, during that time. He referred us to probably 200 other investors, and we sold 800 homes that year to investors.
Holy cow.
On the open market, right?
Yeah.
So my dad had this
making 3%
system of just writing contracts, right? And then he would get something under contract, he'd send it out to investors, and then somebody would buy it, he'd assign the contract to them, they'd close on it. So we just kept doing that over and over again. So fast forward, I started taking over the traditional business. My dad was working investors, I was working over here. So at that time, my dad thought this brilliant idea, like, let's open a painting company, because we were managing all those properties for the investors. So now we have captured audience.
So you were doing property management?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, my dad's always been into property management. We still own a property management company today.
And that was kind of your agreement with them or his agreement and your agreement with them on the front end was hey, we'll source the deal, we'll give it, you'll buy it, and then we'll manage it for you on the back end.
You don't have to do anything, right? This is a totally hands-free investment, right? And so we did that, and then we started opening construction companies, and that was really the demise, right, was taking the eye off the ball, because now we were managing all these people. Yeah. And I mean, at the height of it, 2007, when everything went chaotic, we had 25 fleet vehicles and 75 employees and like $75,000 a week going out in payroll.
A lot of overhead.
And a lot of chaos, right? So I always regret that part of my life. But it was a huge learning experience, right? I don't regret it because it was a failure that I learned from, and we wouldn't be where we're at, right? That was why we separated the construction company. So all that to say, we did all that. It was great, but we took our eye off the ball with real estate, and we lost everything, right? So we got foreclosed on. I had 2 small kids. We lost our house. And at that time, my dad was making some decisions that I didn't agree with, and I walked away, right? My wife and I walked away from my parents and the team. And it was brutal for about 10 years on our family, right? Because we walked, right? We were both going through our struggles, and we walked away with more than $1 million worth of personally guaranteed debt and a foreclosure. Yeah. And the market, like, what do you do? Right? I mean, at that time, talking about failure, right? Between 2008 2009, that was probably the lowest time in my life. I wrote a suicide note at one point because I watched my wife walk out, during Christmas to go wait tables, because that's how broke we were. You go from living in a 4,000 square foot house and all the things to having nothing. And we have all this debt, all these creditors. We've got 2 little kids. I was working on cars, doing sprinklers, like anything I could do in between real estate just to get through it, right? I mean, we were even hiding cars every other month to not get repossessed. That was how low it went, right? And then so we were going along, right? We were playing with short sales, right? I didn't know anything about them. That was how I met Fred and Kevin.
Okay.
And that was the start of our relationship, which is a really funny story with them. And so end of 2009, actually it was September 10th, 2009, I get a call from my broker at Realty Execs. And she goes, do you have $10,000? Do you want an opportunity? I'm like, yeah. You say yes and figure it out later. I'm like, I don't got 10 grand. So I borrowed 10 grand from a buddy of mine. And that was my start into the REOs, into the bank owned.
Wow.
So what had happened was there was an agent at Realty Execs that had all the Fannie account, like for the entire state. And it was a mess. It was a total mess. So we took it over.
If you've ever wanted to get into wholesaling real estate and you want to learn how to flip contracts and wholesale, right? Maybe you're brand new, maybe you've never wholesaled a deal, or maybe you're even doing a couple of deals a month right now, but you want to learn how to do more. Instead of joining my coaching program or somebody else's coaching program, we're actually looking to hire. So go ahead and message me 480-418-5339 and send me a text message opportunity, okay? So if you want to work with me, you want to work with my incredible team, you want all of our leads, you want all of our systems, all of our processes, everything, right? And I've done about 2,000 wholesale deals in my career, then go ahead, shoot me a text, 480-418-5339, and message me opportunity. And look, especially if you're in my state, okay, the state of Arizona. If you live in Arizona and you want to get into wholesaling, this especially is an opportunity for you because you can come sit right in this office with my entire team and be a part of one of the biggest wholesaling companies in the country. I look forward to talking to you.
And we started working on it, and I'm like, okay, this is my opportunity to figure out this business. And I'm going to work 24 hours a day, whatever it takes, because this is my opportunity to get out of where we're at.
Sure.
And so that's what we did. I mean, I promised myself that I would brown nose every asset manager. I mean, anybody possible, that was what I was going to do.
Yeah.
Because it was my opportunity. So 4 years later, after doing like over 5,000 Fannie and Freddie REOs, we paid off all of our debt. We bought a house in 2012. We still live in that house.
Wow.
And as the tail end of the foreclosure stopped, was when my dad got sick, right? So while I was doing foreclosures, my dad's doing trustee sale. Mm-hmm. My dad bought over 1,000 homes at trustee sale for investors, right?
Yep.
You know, he was a big name in that part of the business and did really, really well with it. The problem is that he didn't do it for himself. He applied it to everybody else, but not himself.
Yep.
And so in 2015, he's diagnosed with terminal cancer. So now I have to spend half my time breaking down his business and figuring out what's going on, because my mom doesn't know. Mm-hmm. And so I spent half my time doing my stuff, half my time doing his stuff, and it was 9 months before he passed.
Wow.
So I started to get aha moments as I was working with my dad. I'm like, okay, so we're back, you know, we're in good graces, and we're having, you know, some fun. I mean, he's almost brain dead through a lot of that process. We worked through a lot of messes, right, through a lot of things, but it gave me ideas. I'm like, okay, so this Canadian investor raised a bunch of capital from other people, and now he's buying homes and getting a cut of it. And I'm like, well, how can I raise capital, right? That's one of the biggest myths that we have as real estate agents, right? I don't have money to invest. I don't have 20% down. I can't buy a flip.
Biggest myth.
All the things, right? Yep. So we start down this road of, okay, I play racquetball with a guy for the last 15 years. He's been a great mentor of mine. He just turned 80 this week. And I asked him, like, hey, can I borrow $110,000? I found this house, which was a Zillow lead.
Yeah.
Right? It was inheritance, North Carolina. The guy came in. It was terrible. So we bought it, right? The guy loaned me $110,000. Well, years later, you know, I have a credit line with him for about $3 million.
Wow.
That is text messaging, right? I need this much to buy this, right? And then I started realizing, I'm like, oh, my relationships create capital. And we started partnering with investors, and we started doing the flips for them and splitting the profits. And we started like basically joint venturing, right? Mm-hmm. And then we started to get to the point like, wait, maybe we can borrow money from them. And so that really was what started the journey. And, you know, I remember the first flip we did with him, it was like, I think we made 50 grand and we split the profit with him. And, you know, I still remember like Wendy painting the fireplace, and she was in it and she was building her team. And, you know, in fact, that first flip was where our electrician came from. He's still with us, right?
Yep.
And so that was what started the ball rolling, right? And then we started realizing, like, well, and we still own that house that we bought, right?
Wow.
And
in North Carolina?
No, he was in North Carolina. It was his grandmother's house out here. It's at 19th Avenue in Thunderbird, in my old hood.
Yep.
And so now we fast forward to where we're at now, which is, we did a bunch of flips, we did a bunch of investments, and we started figuring out how to keep more, right? To where, our portfolio is probably worth between 45 and 50 million right now.
Which is insane, which is awesome. Yeah. And congratulations on all of that. I want to talk really quick too about, I think a lot of people watching and listening, like I'm always fascinated. I know like people watching and listening are too. But like when you're in this moment, like psychologically, and then we'll move on, of everything's crashing and burning, right?
Yep.
Like your wife goes out on Christmas to wait tables, what gets you through that? Like in that moment, because I think there's somebody watching right now, like they're going through their version of that, right? And like, how do you have hope? Like, what is it in that moment that keeps the marriage? Obviously, you and your wife are still together, right? Mm-hmm. And just keeps you going. I mean, is there a thing that you held on to?
There's a lot of faith, right? The one thing that I left out of that whole story at 2009 was when I got that opportunity. 3 months later, I broke my neck, right? Which was like, okay, how do I keep this opportunity from going away? So I was doing BPOs with a neck brace on in the hospital and not letting anybody know what was happening because I didn't want to lose the opportunity. So there was a lot of faith, right? You gotta trust in what you trust, right? We trust in the Lord, and that's what we did. And we just like, hey, we're gonna make this through, right? I'm gonna figure it out. I'm just gonna have to work harder. I'm gonna have to work more hours, and we're gonna have to do things differently. So there's this accordion file that I keep. And it was all the things that we went through in that time frame, right? It's 3 pages of debt. It's 3 pages of payments. And it's kind of like the old school Dave Ramsey thing, right? We just started marking things off, right? And we started working through it. And so we also just started planning ahead. I think some of the thing that you're asking about too is that there was a lot of agents in this business and lenders over the last couple of years made a lot of money but didn't put anything away.
Big time.
Right? And now they're like, oh shit.
They're all struggling.
Right. So now it's like, okay, so how do we fix that going forward? So you have to learn from it, right? Mm-hmm. So anybody that's in that position right now, the market is still amazing for anybody. Back then, when we were selling REOs, you go show somebody 50 homes to make $750 because the house was $20,000. You got a minimum commission of $1,000, right? So you had to do a lot of transactions to equal what we can make now.
People can't even wrap their brain around that now. Yeah.
Gas was like $1.50 back then.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think the hope thing is a lot of mental, right? You know that, right? Yeah. It's a mental game. Like if you want it, you're willing to work for it. Same conversation I'm having with my 18 and 20-year-old right now, right? They're wanting to upgrade their cars and do different things. Like, my greatest story from my dad was, hey, if you want Air Jordans, my responsibility is to buy you a $15 pair from Kmart. You have to work for it. Yep. Here's 15,000 flyers. Go put them on doors, and that will earn you the money to buy your Air Jordans. Mm-hmm. So anything that you want in life, you've got to be willing to work towards, not just hang back and go, well, it's okay, or lay down and die, or whatnot.
Sure. Yeah, and I love that. And I think the faith is really big. I think that everybody needs to have faith in something. And I'm like you, right? I have faith in the Lord. And that's where I'm grounded. So like when you go through trial and tribulation, you have a sturdy foundation, right? It's just like real estate, but we have to build our lives and our relationships on a sturdy foundation. Right. And I think that a lot of people don't, unfortunately, and it's not a matter of if, but when you're going to go through trial and tribulation, right? And if you're not careful and you don't have a sturdy foundation, your life will completely fall apart. Right. And I think you got to be really careful of that.
Well, I think it also goes back to this is happening for me, not to me, and all the lessons that we learn. Right, here's the big thing. Right, no matter what failure you're experiencing. There was actually something the other day that was really good. Just because you effed up or you failed doesn't define you as a failure or an F up, right?
I love that.
And so when we look back, I didn't realize what we went through financially, that we were allowed to go through it so that we could help a number of people later. We learned so much, like how to deal with creditors, things to do, right? So 2 years later, when I'm talking to clients, I'm like, oh, well, you should do this because this is what we experienced, right? So I realized later on is like, well, I think God allowed me to go down that path so I could be here.
The test was the testimony.
Right.
Yep.
And so when you go through those things, you can't look at the failure. You've got to look at what I learned from it, and also who is it going to impact in the future?
Yeah.
right? So when I look at the stuff that my dad went through, it impacted my future. And now what I'm doing is trying to help other people impact their futures, like through my experience. And so, I believe that God allows us to go through certain things, and sometimes you just don't know how it's going to impact somebody.
I think sometimes the very things that we want and that we pray for and that we ask for, we're not ready for in that moment because we haven't been through the trial and tribulation that would prep us to have that level of weight or of responsibility. And so sometimes we ask for something, and what we really have to go through this big trial and tribulation in order to get the thing that we're asking for, right? And we miss that. I mean, obviously in our mind, when we ask for something, we're just thinking of the positive, picture perfect thing that we want, right? I want the Lamborghini, I want the big house, I want the perfect relationship, right? But in order to get that and then sustain that when we have it, we have to go through the crap, right?
Yep.
And I think that's really important for people to hear. So I love what you said about the switch, I think, in your brain clicking when you talked to that Canadian investor you're talking about a little while ago, and you thought to yourself when he said, I raised capital and then I bought real estate and I made a percentage of doing that, right? And it kind of opened your mindset of, when you had seen your dad doing what he was doing for so long for other people, not for himself. And then you talk about this story, like, I want to talk about that a little bit more because I think a lot of people struggle, like you said, to wrap their brain around, I don't actually need a bunch of money to own real estate, or I don't need good credit, or I don't need, I might need to find a good deal. I might need to go source a relationship, right? But tactically and logistically, how do you do that?
Okay. First thing is I want to go back to that Canadian investor. There's two things I learned from him. He talked about raising capital, and then there's also a saying that I have that I actually tell my investors now is that I will work with you, I will not work for you.
I love that.
The reason being is that we both need to make money. And that particular investor really took advantage of my dad because that was like my dad's bread and butter. And so he was always grinding my dad down so he could make more money. So it's really clear with people that we both get to make money and I will work with you, not for you.
I love that.
Right? I'm not your chihuahua. And so, going through that was just sitting down and going, well, how scary is it going to be for me to ask this person if I can borrow money from them?
Sure.
Right? And it was scary, right?
Which is probably why people don't do it, right? A lot of the times.
Right. Because there's risk in it and there's different things, but there's also not a clear path to where they want to be. Right. So, if you're a real estate agent, you're going through, you're like, I'm selling houses and this is hard right now. And, or even when it was easy, nobody was looking at like, what's the other side? Right. So I think there's got to be a clear path and an understanding that, hey, I want to create income. I want to build wealth. And I want to change maybe, my past or my family's past or break those chains of the past of being able to do this for my family. And the more that I understand it, the more I can help other people understand it, right? Because now the good, right? It's, it's like Southwest Airlines, right? Put the oxygen mask on yourself and then put it on your kid. Same thing here. If the oxygen mask on me first and I understand it and I screw it up on myself, now I've learned from it and now I can help my clients do it, right? Or I can help other agents do it and understand that.
I love that. Yeah, and I think that's super important for people to understand. So, then let's just take somebody who maybe is an agent right now, or they've flipped properties. Somebody even maybe like me, I guess maybe I might even be a good example of this, right? And in 2023, we're going to raise capital and acquire more property. But, I've wholesaled probably like 2,000 homes. I have partners in this office that, like me and them, have wholesaled probably like 5,000 homes,
right?
Collectively. And then I've been an agent and represented probably like 300 or 400 retail transactions, right? And I only own a handful of rentals. Right. So, obviously, and we were talking a little bit before the show, one of my biggest mistakes is I didn't keep enough, right? And so 2023 was kind of a year where I said, okay, I want to, and now I have a lot of relationships, obviously, and I know a lot of people that have way more money than I do.
Sure.
And maybe they're in different industries. I know people that are in the medical marijuana industry, or they're in the teeth whitening industry, or whatever, right? And they've got a bunch of money. They don't know maybe a bunch about real estate, and I know a ton about real estate, right? And there's a lot of people, I think, watching that might be in that same kind of, situation. How do you structure it? Like, what's the best way in your experience to structure going and raising capital and acquiring property? And would you start with single family? Or would you go multifamily or storage or development? I mean, what would you do if you were doing it brand new?
Let's start back. With that last question, right? Single family, multifamily, right? Majority of real estate agents, they know single family,
And that's it.
right?
Yep.
And that's great. So let's just start there.
Okay.
So I do this exercise called Dream Life Budget, right? And I ask real estate agents like, hey, if you could retire at age 60 and not have to do another open house, not have to talk to another buyer, how much monthly income passively would you want, right? And then let's reverse engineer it. How many houses is that going to take? How long is it going to take, right? You have to know what kind of target you want, right? My goal, I said it from stage, was 50-50 at 50. I'll be 45 in March. I wanted to own 50 single-family homes at the age of 50, giving me $50,000 a month in passive income.
Completely passive.
Completely
no matter
passive,
what. Yep.
right?
So
Now,
you had no earned income. I love that.
no
Yep.
earned income, don't have to do anything, right? I'm now set and secure, right?
Sure.
We're about a third of the way there because we're leveraged, right?
Yep.
But that's okay, right? That was part of the plan. But you have to know what you want to invest in. So then it's kind of going through the buy box, right? So because my mom owns the property management company, when we started investing in things, I started looking at the details of the management company. What houses are performing the best? What areas are performing the best? A bigger house, a smaller house, like what performs, right? And so we created this buy box, right? So I know when I go to a listing appointment or I get a call, does my light bulb go off because this would potentially be a great investment
Every
property?
deal you look at, you're mentally running it through your buy box.
Yes.
Just like a hedge fund.
Yes.
Yep.
And so you look at that and you're like, okay, that's a keeper, right? That's what we want to keep. That's what we want to invest in. Even if I'm paying close to retail for it, not that I want to, but I really want to get a deal on it, or else it goes to market, right? I mean, it doesn't matter. But you have to know what you're looking for. And then you have to be prepared to capture the opportunity, right? So how do you capture the opportunity? This is where most agents haven't been taught and understood, is that their fiduciary responsibility is to give the seller the options and let them choose with the utmost integrity, right? So you go through the process. You're like, hey, you can remodel. It could sell for this. You can sell it as this. It might sell for this. Or I or an investor could pay cash for it this, right? You've laid it out. The agents get stuck at the end of it of like, well, if I did this, how am I supposed to talk to them about paying cash for their house? Because I might look scummy or whatnot. Not if you can show them the numbers, right? So you have to know the numbers, right? When you first started this, when you were wholesaling, how bad were your numbers?
Like underwriting deal, not good at all.
Right.
Yeah, I had no idea what I was doing.
So we've gotten really good because we own a construction company. I can tell you to the T what it's going to take to remodel this house.
Just by looking at pictures. 99%
exactly,
Yep.
right? I know right now in the current economy to gut and refinish the interior of a home, we're not talking about any major mechanical, it's $50 a square foot.
Yep.
Right? And that's just for standard options, right? You go into the higher stuff, it's going to get higher. You start adding mechanical, it's different, right? So we know that going in. So if you know those numbers, I'd encourage your listeners, right? Take $50 a square foot. You go into a wholesale deal. If it needs to be gutted, you can now tell them, like, the investor's going to have to spend $100,000 to renovate this home, right? Whatever that
They
case.
have holding costs.
Right.
They have to pay the agent. You can literally break it down for the homeowner.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're able to give them 3 to 4 options. When we talk to a seller and going A, B, and C, every one of those options is an ability to monetize on it.
Sure.
But if you're an agent and you only go in with one option,
Hey, I can list your home.
I can list your home. What happens then? Maybe they don't want to list their home because you just told them all the work they're going to have to do, and it's not convenient. So now they're going to go call a wholesaler or a We Buy Cash Homes in the Mail thing because you couldn't give them that option when that's the option they wanted.
Sure.
Right? But where the agents need to start working is like, who can I partner with that if I have one of these things, who do I call? Right? That's where I get probably 50% of my deals. The agent's like, hey, I've got this deal. What do you think? Can you buy it? The joke is I go on more listing appointments with agents than I do on my own. Right? So because it's an opportunity, they meet the buyer. I walk through the numbers because I know how to walk through the numbers. And then we get to the point, and guess what? Everybody makes money. Everybody wins. So the biggest thing, and I know that you know this, and looking around, is that the industry is very financially illiterate. You don't know what a cap rate is, right? You don't know what investors are looking for. You're not seasoned in the numbers, and once you're seasoned in the numbers, you know how to move things around and make sense to people, right? And if you know that, it's easier to have a conversation with them and show them. Not that I'm a financial advisor, but I've learned so much on the numbers and moving and what makes people tick. I'm like, okay, we can have this conversation. I can
sure.
offer you this, this, and this, and that's how it works.
Yep. And then you just put it together, right? You just structure it. I mean, yeah. And I agree with you. And I think the opposite of what you said is also true, right? You talked about the agent going in and only being able to give them the one option that they're typically able to give, which is, hey, I'll list your home, right? But there's a lot of wholesalers that can only give the cash option, and they're screwing up, right? Yep. And that's really where we came up with the One Roof brand. One Roof was actually created to solve that exact problem, right? Because we had a retail division, we had a wholesale division, we flipped a bunch of houses, we did subject to or seller finance, and we basically had like 5 different companies,
Right?
And it was kind of confusing to the homeowner, right?
Sure.
Because it was like, well, we have Zabac Group and Cash for Houses and blah blah blah. So we created One Roof, and really that was just a consumer-facing brand that very easily described, hey, we do multiple things under one roof.
Yep.
Right? And we can solve your problem. And also, to your point, I don't think it feels like as much of a sale to the homeowner when you do that as well, right?
Exactly.
You're almost putting the ball in their court and saying, hey, I don't care what you do. I'm just here to serve you. I'm just here to help you.
I put it on a 3rd grade level, right? It's like the old pop-up books we used to read, right? It's choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
Right? So you have the options, choose your adventure, right? And I think that that's, when you talk about wholesalers, I think if wholesalers were trained a little better on like the numbers and how to talk to the seller about the numbers, right? I mean, you probably get them like I do, but the amount of people that I called, they got no clue.
No idea.
Right? None whatsoever. They start with the wrong questions, and it's always the same questions. I'm like, whatever script you guys are using, it's not working.
Right.
But if they knew the numbers and how to talk to the seller, like, oh, well, I'm looking at your house, like this is what somebody's going to look at. But if the wholesalers had a real estate license, really easy to flip that over and refer it to somebody. You don't have to be the seller, but hey, how about I refer you to my friend that does real estate?
Sure.
Right? They're leaving money on the table, and real estate agents are like, well, that's a good, right? It's a good partnership.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think everybody should do that. And I'm with you. I think that is kind of a big goal of mine too, is to help people become more well-rounded in the real estate industry, as opposed to all these people who are just kind of like a one-trick pony. Like it's like, hey, you're like pretty good at one thing, but like you're pretty good at one thing. Like get good at a couple different things.
Right.
Like you're leaving a lot of money on the table.
Right.
Yep.
It's very similar to, one of the options that we present is always like, hey, have you thought, depending on the conversation, but it's always one of the options. Have you thought about keeping this as a rental? Most people's myth is like, people are going to trash it, all the things, right? But we show them the numbers and show them what it looks like. And you go through and you're like, this is how we build wealth. Even a traditional real estate agent that's going into a listing appointment, they want to sell their house. You reverse, you're like, hey, what if you kept this and we did an equity line, and then you can go out and buy your next home, right? Yep. And now we've got a rental property. Now you're creating wealth. And so then you can do that again. So, a traditional agent, think about it, if they started off with a first-time home buyer, they're 25 years old, and you go, look, we're going to have this strategy session, and I'm going to show you how you can be retired with X amount of money in 25 years, because no 25-year-old is looking at 25 years from now. Nobody. Or are they being taught by that, right? Yep. I'm going to show you how we're going to buy a house. It's not going to be the thing you nest in. And then in 12 months, we're going to create a plan for you to buy another house and keep this one a rental. Yeah. And we're going to do that a couple of times. And then, if you do that 5 or 6 times by the time you're age 35, you're now creating in 30 years $10,000 to $15,000 of passive income with $1 million+ in rental properties that are free and clear.
Yep. You could probably borrow against at that point.
Well,
too.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can leverage, you can do whatever, right? Yep. So it depends on what people want. So it's starting out with, if agents had an investment mindset going in, it changes the conversation.
Whole game.
It adds value, because now guess what? When somebody's like, this guy tried to make me keep my house.
Yeah.
How does that change the perspective, right?
The whole thing changes.
It's never, you've got, I was reading your board out there in the front office, right? You use a lot of the same terms I do, right? You've got solutions on there, right? And we use strategies and solutions, right? Because that's really what we are in the real estate business, right? We want to guide people to the solution or the strategy that works best for them.
Sure.
And eventually, one of those is going to monetize. Now, if somebody keeps the rental property, right? Do I get some referrals out of it? Do I get some repeat business out of it? Are they going to buy another house, right? Because if a first-time home buyer is going to live there average 5 to 7 years, and you can turn them into a sale every couple of years, you've just doubled your business from that person.
For sure.
Because you've taught them up front what it looks like.
No, I think teaching and educating is the most powerful thing that you can do. And I think a lot of people like almost think that they need to hard close people on a particular option in order to like make money right now. They're like, it's such a scarcity mindset, I think, of like, oh my gosh, like if I don't just get this sale right now, like, it's like just expand your horizon a little bit. Like if you just educate people, like what goes around will come around.
Yep.
You'll be taken care of, and arguably you're going to make a whole heck of a lot more money as time goes along.
Sure.
Than if you just are just a listing agent. That's all you do, and you just force everybody to list their property, and and half the people are unhappy with you because it probably wasn't the best thing for them, right? And you talked them into it, you know, or whatever you're doing.
Right.
So I totally agree. Back to kind of what you were talking about with like the buy box and stuff. I'm just curious, what is your buy box in like Arizona, single family? Like, what do you look for in a property?
So we started out doing the stats, and everything was about reducing long-term liability, right? So our buy box is under 2,000 square feet.
Okay.
It's typically a 3 to 4 bedroom, carport or garage, don't care. No pool. If it has a pool, I'll implode it, right? Single AC unit, and typically no HOA, no condos or townhomes.
Year built?
Doesn't matter.
Really?
Doesn't matter, especially if it's a good enough deal, because here's the thing. The newer homes, great. They're in HOAs, right? They're typically in outlying areas. Those are the first ones where the rent comes down.
Yep.
So when you go in, like our buy box is typically inside the 101, right? And it goes down to about northern. Actually, we own some stuff in Maryville and things like that. So I'll give you an example. A house that we own in Maryville. It was built in 1960. Okay. It was a gut job, right? What happens when we flip houses? You make 20, 30 grand for somebody to enjoy all the new stuff for the next 20 to 30 years.
True.
Right?
Yep.
So if we go into a house like that, we replace the sewer, we put new windows in it, we put a new roof on it, we put a new AC unit on it. Everything was redone on the inside.
Right.
We get 20% more than market rent because it's almost brand new. And we've got over $100,000 in equity after it was renovated. The sewer is new. Like, I'm not going to have any problems with it.
Yeah.
Now I've just sold it, made 20 grand instead. You know, it's increased in value. We refinanced it. We pulled some money out of it. And now it's set for the next 20 or 30 years. I'm not going to have any capital going out on it. Sometimes the investors go to these real estate seminars, right? You've probably gotten calls from those buyers, right? And they're like, you know, I want to buy a $500,000 house because it's going to have better rent. This is where going to knowing the numbers are. Why is it smaller and those types of things? Because imagine if you buy a $500,000 house, it's got a pool, it's got 3 AC units, and it's 4,000 square feet.
Sure.
That is a temporary solution for somebody.
Yep.
Nobody's renting that for 5 or 10 years.
Agreed.
Okay? So what happens is somebody moves out of that every year. Your rent might be $3,000 on that big of a house with all that liability.
You got to market it.
Right, all the things, but my 2,000 square foot house is getting $2,100 a month and I only have 1 AC unit, no pool, no liabilities. You know how much a pool costs to maintain over 30 years?
A lot of money.
110 grand.
I had no idea it was that much, but I knew it was
Because
a
you
lot
have to
of money.
replaster
Yeah.
every 10 years, the fixing, you're paying for pool service, and it's the liability.
Yep.
Right? So like when we buy rental properties, if the pool's okay, we'll leave it. The minute it needs to be replastered, the tenant goes out, we implode it.
Yep.
Peace out on the pool.
Wow, I love that.
'Cause
What about solar?
We've got a few. Like if the deal's good enough, we'll buy it and keep the solar on it. I hate solar. Like, it's
know.
such a pain in the rear end, but
Why do these solar guys, like, I get it, like, there's a lot of money in that industry, and I probably have people that won't like me for saying it, but, like, you know, like, dude, I feel like, I don't know, I guess what I don't like about the solar industry right now is that they pretty much lie to the homeowner when they're getting them to say yes to solar. They're like, it's going to make your house worth more money, and it's going to make it, and it doesn't do anything they say it's going to do.
no. It doesn't add value because there's a lien against it.
Nobody wants it.
You're not getting 30 grand more out of the house. I mean, if not, you're probably getting less.
Yep.
And the only thing you're doing is you're replacing the power payment with a solar payment. That is all that's happening.
That's it.
The only people that I've heard that are like, they believe in it are the people that bought the system outright. They intentionally invested in it. But here goes back to the financial literacy. You have to look at your return on investment and how many years it's going to take to get that back.
I'm going to take $30,000 of my cash
Yep.
in the bank,
Yep.
right? And I'm going to buy solar to save $200 a month. Is
Yep.
there anything else I can go spend 30 grand on and make anything more than $200 a month?
Yeah, I can put a down payment on a house and keep it as a
Right.
rental that's going to cash flow, that's going to pay my electrical bill.
Exactly.
Right? Again, that's return on investment. You talked about Robert Kiyosaki. I mean, I remember watching a video of his, and it's like he wanted to buy a Rolls Phantom, right? He could pay cash for it.
Sure.
His wife told him, go buy real estate that's going to pay for the payment on the Rolls.
Agreed.
right? And I think that's how all of us kind of learn to live. I have that, everybody's got a different opinion, right? You leverage things to pay for other things, right? So the rental properties are paying for certain things, and it's just a different way to operate versus, pay everything off. Well, that's not the way you get wealthier quicker.
Not at all. Yeah, and it's what Dave Ramsey will tell you. But he makes a lot of money telling us that too. So,
but I mean, you got to love Dave Ramsey. We went through the Dave Ramsey program early on in our marriage, and I think Dave Ramsey is more for people that are in that this is all my income is going to be, so I have to make that plan. Versus where if you're an entrepreneur, right, there's different ways to get there. And sometimes you need to use leverage to make money, right, from that standpoint, like in real estate. And it's kind of like you think about Dave Ramsey telling people, wait till you have 20% and don't pay it down. I'm like, okay, so somebody in 2018 lost $250,000 in equity because they were waiting to save their 20%.
Yeah.
When they could have gotten it for 3%.
Right.
Down.
Yep. It's ridiculous if you ask me. But I do agree with the one thing you said, that the audience of people that he's talking to are people, I think, that they make a certain amount of money. They're totally okay with that. They don't ever intend or plan or want to make more money.
Right.
And it's just the way it is, right?
Sure.
And it's just like, okay, how do I optimize what I have, and knowing that like what I have is probably going to be all that I ever have,
Right.
and I'm just going to continue down that road. And there's nothing wrong with that, right?
No.
It's a frame of mind, I think,
Sure.
and guys like us, obviously, a lot of people listening probably, if you're listening by default, you probably don't have that frame of mind. But it is an interesting way to kind of educate people, I think, for sure. It's just an old school way, too. My dad's like that, dude. Like, my dad owns everything in cash. He's worth a bunch of money, which is kind of an odd thing. But and I didn't grow up with my dad. I grew up with my grandparents. But he, just like, interesting guy. Drives a 1990 Toyota Camry. It has like towels on like the center console because it's all the leather's all jacked up. So you got like, and like
That's a generational thing, though,
dude. Weird.
Right? I mean, you've probably read the book The Millionaire Next Door.
Yep.
Right. I mean, that's you've got the 2020 millionaire version versus the the Millionaire Next Door version where they're driving older cars and those types of things. Cars for me are just something that I enjoy, so I'm not going to drive around I've got a couple of very old cars, right, that I have no problems driving around.
Well, it's an old car, but not
right.
Classic old car.
Yep.
Yeah, totally redone. I want to talk real quick, and I want to talk about cars and stuff in a little while too. But we were talking a little bit before the show about one particular investment strategy that you've come to know, which is the doing, and I don't want to even explain it the wrong way, but taking I guess basically two mortgages on a property and getting the equity for the down payment, and kind of I'll let you elaborate on it a little bit, but
so it's some people know the BRRRR method, right? It's the buy, renovate, refinance, repeat, right? Yep. Well, it doesn't always work the way you want it to, and so that first property that I borrowed the $110,000 for, right? Let me just try to lay this out simply. We figured out that if I buy a house with hard money, don't buy it with cash, because if you buy it with cash, you can't. The refinance is different because it's considered cash out rather than a rate and term refinance, right? So when you go through and you buy it with hard money, and then what we figured out later was like, through another entity that we own, we can record a second lien at the time of closing. What that does is that they're both liens are considered purchase money. Okay. If you do a second lien afterwards, it's not considered purchase money, it's considered cash out. So it makes a difference when you go to refinance something. Okay. So it's the rules and the way you lay it out.
You gotta play it right.
Right. So if you buy a deep enough discounted property that needs to be renovated, that $110,000 property, we paid $110 for it, and we liened it, for another $20,000 over top of it, right? That was back when construction materials was a lot less, right?
Sure.
So we've got two liens, one for $110, one for $20.
Okay.
Now we've done the renovation, we got it rented, and we waited our 6-month seasoning while the tenant was in there, right? So I'm a little negative cash flow right now, but in that time frame, the property increased in value, and when we refinanced, it appraised for $175,000. The difference between the 130 and the 175 is now my 80% loan to value.
Right.
I created 20% equity. That was my down payment on that property. Right? Yep. I didn't have to put any money in that deal. So when we refinance that, they consider this first and second. It was a rate and term refinance, so it wasn't a higher rate because we weren't pulling cash out. Yep. And the trick to that is that second lien. right? Because if you're trying to pull cash out on investment property, it's really hard to do.
Yep.
Or they're going to do a lower loan to value, right? It's usually 60, 65%, probably even lower in this market.
Sure.
So we learn to do that on everything that we do. So no matter what we buy, we record that first and second, right?
That's really the trick right there.
That is the trick.
Yeah, because honestly, I didn't know about it until today. I had no idea.
You have to have the liens.
Yep.
Now, the second mortgage, it doesn't mean you have to come in with money. It's a lien, right? So we lien it from one of other entities, which is our construction entity, and that gives us the ability, if that appraisal at 175 would have come in at 200, and I had the ability to pull some cash out, I can fluctuate that second lien to a $40,000 payoff rather than a $20,000 payoff.
Sure.
So what it does is it gives you flexibility when you're refinancing. And yes, this is all legal, right? I'm not skirting the system because technically I'm not pulling cash out. I'm just getting the cash that I put into it. Right? That's what I put into it to increase the value. And so we've done this with multiple different lenders. They all understand it, all have seen it, and nobody's got any problems with it.
Wow.
So it is the trick. I mean, that's how we own 80 properties right now. We didn't put a bunch of 20% down on things. We didn't pay cash for stuff. We created the down payments and then leveraged.
Yep.
Right. And obviously, as you get to 20 properties, 10 properties, you got to start looking at outside sources for lending. Right.
Sure.
That's a whole nother thing. So what that does, and here's the key to that. When we started, our goal was to keep one flip every quarter.
Okay.
Because originally, 8 years ago, it was like we want to own 25 rental properties in the next 5 years. Well, we kind of blew that out of the water. It got a little bit addicting because when you get creative, you're like, well, I don't have to have any money to put in this.
Right.
I just have to work the system.
Yep.
That's what we did.
I'm just going to buy more.
Right. So if you're flipping homes and you're wanting to invest, if you can do a flip that, again, goes back to that Maryville property, I just put all this money into it. Nothing's going to go wrong for the next 20 years. And I've got enough equity in it, and I can sustain without the income coming in. You're better off. Let's say you make $100,000 selling that house as a flip. You're in a 30% tax bracket. You're now $70,000. You paid typical, I don't know how you operate, but you know what? I'm the investor, so I pay my real estate company coming in and going out because that's how we keep things liquid and that's how we keep things bankable. I paid cost of sale, another $20,000. I'm really only left with $50,000.
Sure.
But I want to send the government $30,000 and I'm going to take income of 20 and now I'm left with 50 when I could use all of that equity as down payment and keep the house.
Yeah.
And then I don't have any of that cost. And I still have the equity.
You're way better off keeping it. And
it doesn't have to be all of them, right? I mean, that's part of our business, right? We flip homes, it creates income, right? That is part of our thing. But most of the people that flip homes, they might be doing 1 or 2 a year, right? It's not like us, right? We're blowing and going on stuff and moving things through. So if you could keep one of those a year and create that equity and you do that for 10 years, what do you have?
You have a retirement plan. I mean, you have financial stability. You've created wealth. You've done a lot of things.
Yeah.
Which everybody, I would argue, wants. I mean, like, who doesn't want that, right? Like,
Sure.
Who doesn't want a future where they know if somebody were to get sick or somebody couldn't work or, whatever, like, you're good.
I think the other negative piece that happens with anybody, right? Back to the Dave Ramsey thing, right? A lot of investors, right? Everything's got a cash flow. Okay. I use a lot of this with my investors. If you talk to the average person, you're like, how much are you putting in your 401k? $200-300 a month. Cool. You're going to put $200 and $300 a month into something that doesn't cash flow. And it's going to have penalties if you use it, right? All the things. And you can't touch it until you retire. You can loan against it, all that other stuff. But I always ask people, I'm like, if you were $200 to $300 negative on a rental property and it's increasing in value by 5 or 6% a year, and somebody's paying down the mortgage, why is that any different than a 401k? The only difference is you have equity, you can borrow against it, you can refinance it, you could sell it if you wanted to. You have way more options, way more strategies you can do this way than you do the other way. Now, obviously, for some people, it's like, oh, well, I don't want negative cash flow. Okay, well, $300 a month negative probably really equals about $100 a month negative when it comes to your taxes.
Agreed.
Again, financial literacy all the way through.
Yep.
I don't know about you, but I spend a boatload of money with my CPA on tax strategies, right?
I totally agree with you, by the way. And I just had Doug Hopkins on the show a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. And he said the exact same thing, right? He's like, dude, he's like, the majority of the rentals that I bought, and now he owns, I want to say he owns 70 now, free and clear. Like,
Right.
they're all paid off. And he's like, dude,
He
he's like,
was a
the,
TV star.
right. He's like, the majority of them, when I bought them, he's like, I was slightly either break even or slightly negative cash flow.
Yep.
And he's like, I didn't care.
Yep.
Right. And I think especially if you are a business owner, entrepreneur, and you're making money elsewhere,
Right.
right? And you're confident in your ability to continue to make
Sure,
money, right? Let's
sure.
take somebody like me, for example, right? We run a big operation, we make a lot of money. A couple $100 of negative cash flow is not going to make a big
Right.
difference. I'm hardly going to notice that money. Like, now's the perfect time to do it too,
Right.
right? Like, I'm young. We've got a big operation. The odds of us like not being able to figure it out are very, very low.
Right.
We just have so many different exit strategies and different things that we can pivot, and we're very nimble. So man, I totally agree. It's a very not popular thing to say though.
No, it's not.
You know, but I love that you guys have both said that now.
But the other part of it too is that if I bought a deep enough deal and here's the question. Would you trade $300 a month negative equity for $100,000 in equity?
All day long.
Right? Negative cash flow for $100,000 in, right? So that first house that I talked about, we were negative $300 a month until we refinanced. Then it did really well. We bought that, we were into it for $130. Last year, or in 2021, it appraised for $410. Okay? It rents for $2,200 a month. We pulled $200,000 out of it, and now that's back into another property.
Right.
It's not cash flowing as much as it was. I don't need it to cash flow right now.
cares?
I have income.
Yep.
What I need to do is create the income to support the negative cash flow while the tenants who are my partners are paying things down for me.
Sure.
And so it's just it's a mindset thing,
Yeah.
but you do have to be able to sustain, right? I would never tell a family that's like living so tight to their budget to do that.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece too is back to the taxes, right? Real estate agents, again, wholesaler, right? They're participating in real estate. There's like 7 or 9 questions that you have to answer correctly to claim active participant in real estate for your taxes, right? Yep. What happens there is the massive amount of tax benefits that you get for that. So on average, our CPA's done it a couple of times. She ran it with and without the portfolio.
Okay.
On average, our portfolio, so here's cash flow, right? Our portfolio saves us from sending the government $100,000 a year
This is wild. Yeah.
because of depreciation and the different things, right? So you tack that in, technically I'm making about $8,000 a month cash flow just by not sending it to the government.
100%, which goes back to the mindset and understanding that, right?
Right.
And I think people need a good tax strategist. Yeah, and like you said, I think you hit the nail right on the head. As long as the person's not struggling to make their Netflix payment, like obviously,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Right.
You're talking about this from an entrepreneurial standpoint. You're making you've got extra cash you have extra money at the end of the month. A lot of people that have too much month at the end of the money, it's not going to work, right?
Right. So, I mean, here's the last question on, right? If you could own 70 properties and it was costing you $5,000 a month to own 70 properties,
Oh my gosh, all day long.
Right.
All day long, because I know that in 5 years,
right?
it isn't going to cost me
Right.
$5,000 a month anymore out of my pocket, or
Right.
10 years or whatever.
Right.
In 30 years, they're going to be paid off.
Right.
So you're telling me for $5,000 a month, I'll own a 70 property rental portfolio in 30 years free and clear,
Right.
all freaking day long. Right. I'll figure out how to make the $5,000 a month,
Yeah.
and pay for it. And I think that has to be the mindset, though.
Sure.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I do think that when you go through that mindset, right, it's so different because we live in a different world, right? Both of us have done luxury all the way down to, I think my lowest price condo that I sold in the REO days was $9,500.
Yep.
I probably should have bought that, right? But came with a homeless guy and everything. But you think about people that are in luxury, that's all they know, right? I mean, how many people do I know that are like, oh, you live on the other side of I-17? I'm like, I do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You're on
It's
the
okay.
You're on the west side.
I'm on the west side. Yes. But the luxury agents, like, they're making so much money in that stuff. They're in real estate, but they're not willing to look at, like, what if I'm spending, what if I'm buying some of these things, right? And they're not willing to look at that investment side, right? Because it's the luxury stuff. But, I would challenge the luxury agents, right? You don't want to do it. You don't want to look at it. Then find another agent that understands it that can help you do it.
And partner with them.
And partner with them, whatever. Yeah. That's the other thing, too, on negative. We just relocated a client. It's their second home they bought. It's really cool for them. They're relocating to Texas now, right? They were a little nervous about keeping the second one.
Sure.
And what I told them was, hey, if it gets tight, then let's go back and talk about partnering on it, right? So if I can partner to help you keep the loan, keep the tenant, and we can split some equity and I take over the negative or whatever, relieve the pressure, let's talk about that, right? So you start talking about different things where, again, that's thinking outside the box, right? How do I help people? Rather than just selling the house, how do we help you keep it?
I love that. Yeah, we were talking a little bit before the show while we're on this subject. You were talking about get the different creative ways that we can invest into real estate, and for people listening, subject to is a way. And I was kind of talking to you a little bit about it, and you gave me the example of the I believe it was the lady that was going to go to
assisted living,
right? And in that scenario, you guys were able to work out a really good deal that really just truly benefited everybody at a really high level. Can you walk me through that deal again?
Yeah. So, I always get confused because everybody's got different terms on it, right? Sub 2, and a wrap, right?
Yep.
So,
which is really just clarifies the
it's very
same
similar.
thing.
Yeah,
very
it's the same
similar.
thing,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
I probably use wrap because that was the term that my dad taught me, right? So, in that scenario, we have a client that is going to an assisted living, right? They are never going to need a mortgage. They probably really don't care about their credit. Not that I'm going to damage it, right?
Sure.
And they needed some cash to enter the assisted living. So we sat down and we looked at it. And I said, look, the house is probably worth, $580, cost of sale, some repairs. Here's going to be your net. Yep. Now, what are you going to do? They had $300,000 on the first, and it was at 2.9%, and it was conventional, right? So it wasn't FHA or VA, so easy to wrap.
Very attractive loan.
Right.
Yep.
Very attractive loan. I said, what are you going to do with the $150,000 that you get? Because they needed $50,000 out, okay? What are you going to do with the $150,000? Well, we're just going to put it in the bank or the stock market. I'm like, well, what if you could get a guaranteed rate of return secured by the property that would help you offset your assisted living without risk, right? There's also a little bit of risk in anything, right? When it comes down to it. But
minimal risk.
If you go put $150,000 into the stock market, I mean, my father-in-law's retirement lost 20% last year, right? Is that going to be okay? Is that going to help you out if you lose money, right? It's not. And so what we did is we took the first mortgage, and this is really what a wrap is, right? Is when you're taking the first mortgage and equity and you're wrapping it in one payment, right? So it goes through a servicing company, and then the servicing company pays the first mortgage. The servicing company sends the income to the seller, right? So now what we've done is we've created $1,200 worth of cash flow for them on a monthly basis that offsets their $2,500 a month living expenses. And we put $50,000 down rather than $200,000 down, and we got a mortgage at 2.9%. Now, here's the crazy thing. It was, we got some equity in it, probably about 10, 15%. Probably rents for about $2,700 a month, which is about break even. By the time we're paying his interest and the first, because I think it's $1,400, $1,200, so right about break even. But we bought some equity and have a really good loan on it. Now, that particular property, here's the other side of it. Fantastic, right? All these things. Great rental property, all the things. What else can I do with that property? I can lease option it. I can sell somebody the same terms. I can do so many things once I've got it wrapped up.
So true.
Now I can go back, put it on the market. I can, whatever. The first mortgage also was very cheap, hard money. Right? It's 2.9% hard money.
Right.
Here's the other piece. Back to flipping, right? So that scenario works really well. And sometimes we'll do that. Not everything should be flipped right now. Not everything should be a rental property right now. Again, tax strategy, right? So you take that property and you're like, I'm going to keep it for a year. And let's say I make $100,000 on it next year. It was a rental. Well, now I can 1031 exchange that with zero tax. So that's the strategy that we're using. We're building like 17 spec homes in the next year. Every one of those will go to rental before they're sold.
Wow.
Because if I make a $200,000 or $300,000 profit on a spec, I'm going to pay $60,000 or $70,000 in taxes. Now, it's tricky because the market, right? If we had done that last year and then all of a sudden the market's down, did you really, right? So it's timing is everything, but it's still part of the strategy as to what can you roll forward without having to pay taxes.
think it's just looking at every exit strategy and every possibility every time you look at any deal or talk to any human being, right?
Right.
And I love the scenario. You explained it perfectly with the the older couple that were going into the assisted living, and and that really was a win-win situation, right? And I think the benefit, there's so many benefits, obviously, but you acquire rental property for $50,000 with a 3% loan, right? And they're getting 7% on their $150 in equity they would have had.
Right.
And it really is just the ideal situation, right? And I think the assisted living example in that situation is a great, like when you talk about like a wrap and a sub 2, like my team, they've asked me before, like, how does the seller benefit, or like who benefits in like a sub 2 or wrap, right? And that is a good example. The person who's going into assisted living, it's one of the few examples actually where you're like, okay, like I'm actually doing this person a solid, and it truly is like a win-win, right? There are scenarios where like you're not doing them a solid by doing a sub 2.
Correct. But let's go a little deeper on that. You know that I work the Flagstaff and the Munns Park, the second home community, right? That community got hammered this year. Interest rates are like 8.5% on a second home. It takes an $800,000 second home to like an $8,000 a month payment, right? You're going to have a hard time selling it in that market.
Yeah.
Second home people typically are not needing the cash, nor do they need the mortgage paid off because they're not buying another house right now. But if I said, hey, you know what? I will give you your list price if I can take over your mortgage and you'll carry these terms.
If you're a real estate agent or a real estate wholesaler, then you know that lead generation is one of the most important aspects to any business. You know that you have to consistently generate leads on a weekly, monthly, and yearly basis. That way your team has people to call, and that way you're constantly getting new opportunities in your company. I actually partnered up with a company called Rocket Lead Services, and they have VAs that are outbound cold calling on your behalf every single day. In my experience, there's a lot of different ways that you can generate leads as an agent or as a wholesaler. You can do pay-per-click, you can drive for dollars, you can do text messaging, you can do Facebook ads, Instagram ads, and so much more. In my experience, I believe that cold calling is by far the #1 way to generate leads in 2022. Not only is it my favorite way, but it is the highest ROI from what I've ever found. So Rocket Lead Services is one of the best companies out there for doing just that. They have virtual assistants that get assigned to you and to you only that are constantly calling motivated sellers to generate leads for your business. Again, this is for anybody looking to generate seller leads for their business. This is for a solo real estate agent looking to do a couple of deals a month, all the way to teams that have over 100 agents and you're looking to generate more leads for your team. Wholesalers that are looking to generate more seller leads, all the way to wholesalers that are looking to do many, many deals per month. Go to www.rocketleadservices.com and go ahead and book your free consultation. Again, that is www.rocketleadservices.com and book your free consultation. Now, let's get back to the show.
And you're going to create income, which is better than VRBO income, and everybody wins in that scenario. You're no longer paying for a vacant home and the utilities and the other things, or taking a deep discount to get rid of it. So why not get creative in that market?
Sure.
Right? And so
it's another phenomenal example.
Yeah. So it depends on the market. If you've got, actually Garrett and I were talking about it on the way over. He's like, what benefit do I have for that? I'm like, for you, it wouldn't be.
Yep.
Right? Because my guess is you're probably going to be buying another house pretty soon.
Sure.
You're going to call me in 2 years and go, dude, I need this mortgage paid off because I can't qualify for a house. Mm-hmm. Again, it's going back to making sure that you're setting people up for success and yourself, right? You're like, well, and so let's take the same scenario. Same way we talked about the first and the second, on the one where we refinance. If I do that same scenario on that, which I could go through and do the same thing, get all my cash back because there's enough equity in it to create the down payment.
Right.
So you could do that for a year and go, hey, this is what my plan is. This is how we're going to do it.
Yep.
So I want to keep your mortgage. I'm going to attach a second. You're going to get this, and then I'm going to refinance all of it, and I use the equity for down payment. That's another great plan for something that's like a sub 2.
That is a phenomenal plan. Yeah, and a pretty short-term plan that you wouldn't take very long to accomplish,
No.
And really within 3 to 5 years, I mean, you could do, you wouldn't even have to do that probably, assuming the market was appreciating and things
Sure,
of that nature.
sure.
There's probably other ways you could, even without even doing that, you could figure it out as well and refi. Man, it's just so interesting and so fascinating. What would you recommend, like in 2023? Do you think that nobody's got a crystal ball, but I do ask everybody, like, do you think that this is a good market for people to flip, like truly flip houses in 2020? Obviously, you and your wife are flipping a ton.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it just
Not
depends.
as many as we were, right?
Yeah.
Look, it's if I'm flipping houses right now, you have to, again, it's going back to knowing your numbers, right? So you have to plan for market decline. Not that I'm saying the market's declining,
Sure.
but you do have to plan for that, right? If I'm buying this, so I have one, I'll give you a great example. Just as the market started to shift, we bought one, 75th Avenue in Thunderbird in March. Okay. By the time we got done renovating, and I bought this one really deep, right? I'm like, we should easily clear 200 grand on this thing, right? No problem. So we went through, I mean, it was a $200,000 renovation and it needed everything because it had like 95 cats in it.
Oh my gosh.
So we get done with it and I'm like, you know, we just recently got under contract. I think it closes next week because the tenant was in there for a little while, or the owner. And we ended up having to sell it for $465 rather than $525. And I was like, man, this sucks. If you had done that in reverse and I paid $65,000 or $100,000 more than that because I thought it was such a good deal back then,
Right. You'd have
I
broke
would
even.
have broke
money.
even or lost
Yeah.
money. And trust me, I lost money on a handful of houses this year.
Sure. Yeah.
So you've got to look at that, or you have to look at the exit strategy, right? There was enough equity in that if I needed to refinance it and keep it, I could have, right? So you start looking at, like, what are my exit strategies and how am I going to pull this off? So flipping in this market, I would have no problems with it. I don't think you should cut corners in this market because the inspections are getting worse, right? The Benzers are coming in and everybody's crying, blah. So I think you just have to be really careful, right? If you think that you're paying 65% on it, you better go 10% below that.
Yeah, very interesting. Yep. And
So,
very true.
You know, when people are sending me stuff, I had one a couple weeks ago. The guy's like, you know, what would you do with this one? I'm like, I'll give you $240 for it. Like, that's the only way I'm going to buy that thing. And they ended up taking it. I'm like, okay, cool, right? And because we could close on it in 10 days, but that one, it needed paint, right?
Yeah.
We turned right around and put it back on the market, but these people were motivated because they were going to Washington.
Right.
I'm like, you're going the wrong way. You know that, right?
For real. Yeah. I don't know that is definitely not where I would go right now.
Right.
And I love it. I think that a lot of flippers or people who want to flip don't look at all the different potential exit strategies. And I think I heard somewhere along the way in my career that if you're going to buy and flip a home, have at least one additional exit strategy that works.
Yep.
Before you get into it. The flip can't be the only exit strategy, right?
Right.
So, like, if I plan to flip it and it works as a flip right now in the present moment, nothing changes. Okay, great. Then what other exit strategy would theoretically work in the future?
Sure.
And if you can't find one, then it's probably not a good deal, right?
Right. You know, and you have a choice, and this comes back to relationship capital, right? So we didn't raise capital in like a fund. We raise capital individually through relationships.
Yep.
So, you know, we have some people with $1 million, $500,000. Their money comes in, goes out, right? But there's some
Per deal.
Per deal.
Okay.
There's some investors, as long as they're getting their 8% return on their money, they don't care how long it's out. So if I get into a problem and I decide to keep this, their money's just sitting in it long term until I can flip it or sell it or whatever.
Arguably better than hard money.
Rather than losing money, right?
Yeah.
So some people, again, it goes back to that negative. Do you want to go negative $1,000 a month or write a check for 40 grand?
Very true. Yeah.
Right? I'll take the write-off on it. I don't like it, but it does give you a chance to recover down the road.
Yeah, very true. I like that a lot. Yeah, I think, maybe you can even elaborate a little bit on that for people that don't understand. Like, how do you structure that particular? So, say I got a guy he's got 500 grand, right? He wants to make, let's just say 8%.
What's the conversation?
Yeah, well, that, and then how do you structure it? Like, because you know, I've thought a lot about going and like starting a fund, right? And I've got the attorneys and stuff, and we could start a fund, and I've got a big social media following. Well, you do too now, but you know, if you just want to bring money in on a particular deal, like, how do you structure that, right?
Sure.
Like, hey, I have this one deal right here, and I think it'd be a good deal, and I got a guy that's got a bunch of money, and, you know, what do I do?
So the conversation is through relationships, right? So what I always like to do with people, so if you're a traditional agent, right, you're running around with your clients or they're going to be selling their house, I start asking questions. Hey, would you mind me asking, like, do you have any investment and what kind of rate of return you're getting? Right? And they're like, oh, 7, 8, 4, whatever that is, right? And you go, well, if I had an opportunity for you to get a guaranteed, secured 8, 9, 10%.
Backed by real estate.
Backed by real estate, secured by real estate, would that interest you? Yeah, that might. Okay. Now you've cleared the conversation, right? So then you get a deal and you're like, hey, so I have this deal. I'm buying it at 70 cents on the dollar and I need to borrow $200,000 and I'll give you 8% interest on it. It'll probably be out for 6 to 8 months. Can we do that? And you'd be amazed at how many people are willing to go, yeah, I'm happy to do that, right? As long as my money is working and it's secured, it's great because there's a lot of people right now that are nervous as all get out about the stock market.
Agreed.
Right? And so their choice is to go put it in a T-bill or something of that nature. It's getting 4% return, but it's got to be in there for X amount of time, right? So we started showing the investors like, hey, here's what it is. This is where most people get nervous about. Like, oh God, 8%, 10%. You know what the difference between 8 and 10% is on a monthly payment? It's pretty slim.
Yeah.
Right?
Nothing.
It's nothing.
Yep.
So profitability wise, it's not a big deal, especially if you're going to keep it, whatever the case may be is. So then, you go into it and, we always sit down with our investors and we explain the scenario and we go through, it's a note and deed of trust, right?
Sure.
My office prepares a note. Title creates a deed of trust.
Right. Real simple.
They send their money to the title company.
Yep.
They get a note and deed of trust. They know they're secured by it. And then we start making them payments. And that's really as simple as it is. And everybody in their sphere, I always challenge people. I'm like, you realize that at least 5% of people or 5 people in your sphere have $500,000 of liquid that they don't know what to do with. And by the way, the older people don't want to buy rental properties. They want safe, secure returns on their money without a headache.
Where they don't got to do nothing.
Right. And if they know you, love you, trust you, they are willing to have that conversation. I always, it's one of those great posts, like go post on Facebook or Instagram. Hey, if you had $200,000, what's it invested in and what's been your rate of return over the last year? Just to start the conversation, just to see. Right.
So fascinating.
It is fascinating.
And I would argue you're probably right. Like 5% of everybody's, no matter who you are watching or listening right now, your network has, like mine's probably like a ridiculous number. I'm like, dude, we gotta go raise some capital.
Right.
And
then, we have, because of what we've been doing and talking to clients and different things, right? We have so many people that are like, it's like the guy I talked to the other day, we're going through his house, all the options, and he's like, yeah, if we net $100,000, I'm just not sure what to do with it. I'm like, oh, well, we have this deed of trust program where we can take that $100,000 in and give you a 7% guaranteed rate of return. Would that interest you? He's like, really? He's like, I can invest it with you. I don't have to go put it in the stock market. I'm like, yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah.
Right. So because the reason we can do this is because they're secured against individual assets, right? We're not going into a fund, so it doesn't require SEC reporting and all the other stuff that goes with it, right?
Sure.
It becomes complicated, right? That's why we've kept these relationships all one-off, and that's why we manage it that way.
Yeah, no, and that's the only reason I haven't started a fund yet is because of all the logistics and all the nuances that we have to jump and hoops and hollers and and accredited investors and the whole thing, right? Which I think there's a time and a place to go through and jump all the hoops and hollers and do all that. Obviously, I remember watching even like Grant Cardone go from only accredited and then his journey to going to non-accredited, and the additional scrutiny and all that, and is it worth it? I don't know, but. It's definitely an interesting thing, and I think the way you should start is the way that you're doing it.
Yeah, and the other piece is that it's really important. So you go back to when we lost everything, right? Some of that $1 million of debt was personal debt that we had borrowed for the companies from individuals. My guarantee to my investors is that you will always be made whole. It may not be on the time frame that we talked about if something major happens, but I'm going to make you whole. And some of those investors that invested back in 2008, then when things crashed, it took me a couple of years to get it paid back.
For sure.
But we did.
Wow.
Right. And that's always my guarantee. It's like, I talked to an investor the other day, again, financial literacy, understanding, I'm not real big on the stock market, right? I know enough to see things, but understanding what people are getting, what they're losing, what it looks like for retirement, asking the question, what do you need to live on? those types of things, because you're trying to create that form, you're trying to create that path. So, this guy the other day, he's had $500,000 with us for 6 years. He's, I talk to him every couple of years, right? He just gets his checks. He calls December 31st, says, I want out of my investment. I'm retiring. I'm like, why do you want out now? Right? So I call him and he's like, oh, well, I met with a financial advisor and he can't believe that I gave $500,000 to a realtor. I'm like, well, number one, that's not what happened. Right. We are a real estate investment firm and this is what we do. And by the way, you've had 6 years of 8% guaranteed rate of return secured by real estate. If you pull your $500,000 from me and you go give it for the financial advisor, there is no guarantee. Mm-hmm. It's going to go up and down. And when you wake up in the morning and the stock market crashes, you're going to be like, oh, how's my retirement doing, right? And it's going to make you worry. You haven't had to worry for the last 6 years in this. But you're giving somebody the option. Now, I didn't bash his financial advisor or anything like that. Everybody's got different opinions, right? The financial advisor doesn't know what I'm doing, right? He just assumed it was some realtor that he gave money to, right? By the end of the conversation, he's like, you make a lot of sense. He's like, I've got another $130,000. Can we change the note? I'm like, yeah, we can do that, right? So, but you're also, the other cool thing about the investors that's really important, when you can give them a feel good to their investment, it's not just a rate of return, right? So we're helping a lot of people solve problems. We're creating home ownership. We're creating new homes. We're creating great rental properties. They now feel part of that. Yeah. They don't get to see anything in the stock market, right? But what they do get to see is the stories from us, right? Who we're helping, what it looks like. Especially older people, they love that stuff, right? Sure. They love to know that their money is creating solutions, and then it's creating equity, and it's allowing my family to move forward as well.
Right. What would you say to somebody watching who they want to like meet these higher level people? They're, you sold a house for Chris and Lori Harder, right? Mm-hmm. You're hanging out with, you're the Lindsay Schwartz and Elliott's and a ton of other people, right? You've got these investors and stuff, and maybe somebody's watching or listening, like they don't have these like big relationships or connections, like what, or like even like doing this podcast, right? Like where I'm able to bring on big people and you've got a big social media following. Like how does somebody start on the journey of like forming the bigger relationships and for somebody who maybe can't quite figure that out?
So I'll give you 2 examples. Chris is a very funny story, the way it happened. I decided that after I read Lewis Howes' book, School of Greatness, back in 15.
Love that guy, yep.
I flew to his 2nd annual Summit of Greatness in Columbus, Ohio. I told my wife, I'm like, I'm going to Columbus after I read the book over Memorial Day weekend or Labor Day weekend. Yeah. And she's like, what is in Columbus? I'm like, I don't know. This dude's book I read sounds really cool. I'm going to go. I don't know what it is. That was as I was venturing, like, my dad's just passed. I'm trying to figure out what's next. And I'm like, I want to go outside the industry. I've been to enough real estate conferences. It's the same regurgitated bullcrap. Yep. I want to go see what other people are doing that I can bring back into my business to maybe change it. So I stepped out, right? I'm like, I'm going to go outside of real estate. I went there knowing nobody, didn't know what to expect. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to buy a lunch or buy a drink for somebody just to meet people and talk to them. Yeah. So the first gal I sit down and talk to at the bar, she's like, we're talking stories. She's like, you need to meet Chris Harder. I'm like, who's Chris Harder, right? I don't know Chris Harder. Yeah. And so she introduced me to Chris. I'm like, oh, he's up in the VIP section. This guy must be important. Mind you, Chris had not done his mastermind yet. Yeah. Lori was the bigger star. Chris was just coming out of it. And I don't know if you know this, but Chris used to be in the lending business, right?
I didn't know that.
He was with U.S. Bank when everything crashed, right? Yep. They went through the same transition that Wendy and I did with losing everything and all the stuff, right? Yep. And so she introduced me to Chris. He's like, oh, yeah, I love your stories. Like, let's connect. I'm like, okay, whatever. So I texted him when I got back like a week later. I'm like, hey, you said something about doing a podcast. Like, what is that? Right, so I was episode 75. Wow. I think he's up to like 600 now, right? Yep. I haven't gone back to listen to it. It'll probably be really interesting. So then Chris, which I didn't realize like was kind of a sales thing back then. So I was on his podcast. He's like, a couple weeks later, he's like, hey, I'm launching this mastermind, blah. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm interested. So it was Chris's first year he did his mastermind. So I sign up for it. It's a $24,000 price tag. I'm like, for a year, and I'm like, oh.
Back then.
Yeah, back then. Yeah. It's so much more now. And so I tell my wife, I'm like, I'm going to do this mastermind thing. She's like, what is it? I'm like, I really don't know. Like, I don't. But I paid to be in the room with Chris. I didn't know what I was expecting, right? And the first year, there was 17 of us. I still have some very, very good friends out of that room. Chris and I have become very good friends over the years, right? And it was so amazing to see the relationships. And this will be my 6th year in Chris's mastermind.
Yeah.
I haven't ventured out and gone to find another one because Chris curates the best rooms and the best speakers. I mean, the people that I've met over the years, I mean, insane, right?
Yeah.
It is worth every bit of it. But you have to be willing to pay to get in the room. And you can't go in there salesy. I didn't go there to create real estate clients.
Sure.
I didn't go there to sell Chris a house. It happened through the time and the energy and the stuff that Chris saw me over the years. And so that was a way to get in, right? It really was. The other interesting piece is that I'm sure you get this a lot. Hey, can I buy you lunch and pick your brain? You're
All
like,
the time.
no.
All the time.
For
I don't
20
even
bucks?
reply,
No.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, you feel bad because you want to help everybody, but you're like, I put so much content out there, it's out there. Now, if you really want to get in front of somebody, offer them value. I've had agents text me and go, hey, if you have a day that you're really busy, I will drive you all day to have your time. I'm like, okay, cool.
Yep.
Right? They're offering value. You know how I got in front of Pineda?
How'd you do? Oh, I think you offered to donate to his charity,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
I'm like, dude, I'll pay $5,000, whatever charity you
love
want,
that.
like just to have a conversation. He called me that night.
Yeah.
If you can offer value to somebody or something that means something to them, that's where you're able to get in front of somebody because you've offered value. You're not trying to take from them. You're trying to give in order to get something from them.
So powerful, by the way. You gave and I took 2 very, very valuable pieces of advice. Number 1 is you paid and took the leap of faith to go to the Lewis Howes 2nd annual School of Greatness Mastermind, right? You paid there, and you didn't know what you're getting to be. You paid. It took time, money, and energy to get in that room,
Right.
and you put yourself out there. And then you did the same thing again, joining Chris's first mastermind ever, right?
Yep.
You paid it was a lot of money. You didn't really know what you're getting into. It was his first ever mastermind,
Right.
so there's probably a little bit of uncertainty at the time of like, okay, it's a lot of money. He's never done this before.
Right.
I mean, like there had to have been a little bit of that going on, right? But you did it anyway. So it's like I paid. And or the second thing is I can provide value. Maybe I don't have a lot of money.
Right.
Then I can provide value to get those relationships
Right.
and build those relationships.
And what happens is the ROI over time, right? The return on investment, that mastermind, I mean, things happened organically and naturally.
Yeah.
Chris was never on a drip system. Lindsay and Elliot were never on a drip system. It came naturally through conversations like, hey, we're wanting to do this. What do you think about this? And Chris and I have all kinds of real estate conversations.
Sure.
And plus Chris and I share that passion for cars and some of the other stuff. So we're going to Barrett next week. So you kind of look through those things and you really realize in the first year was such an experience with Chris because like he said, he curates the room and the experiences he does. I mean, dude, we've done helicopters, you name it, we've done it at that group. And it was awesome. Right. And so I've just stayed connected because every year I always tell people, I'm like, every year I pay X amount of dollars for 25 new friends, new connections. But now I have to curate those connections through relationships, not through sales.
Agreed. Who are some of the coolest people that you've met in that mastermind?
Oh my gosh.
Like if you had to name like a couple, just like narrow it down to like two people or something.
One of the dinners was insane. So Tom and Lisa Bilyeu.
Okay.
I think that was the second night dinner. That was the day that they had just closed their deal selling, now I'm going to forget the bar. It's such a well-known like protein bar. And they had just sold it to Nestle for $1 billion.
Wow. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Their story is really cool.
Huh.
And Tom and Lisa are they're crazy. They're super cool people. And then Jay Shetty, Rob Dyrdek. Chris is so well connected with people. Hung out with Lewis Howes a couple of times. I mean, I remember my CFO, she was laughing because the first night that I was at Mastermind that first year, Lewis spoke. And Tammy's like, do not hump his leg. Right? Because you're like, it's like celebrity, right?
Yeah.
And, Lewis is such a great dude and he's so down to earth. I mean, he's the most humble guy
I've
out
ever
there.
met.
Right?
I met him at the Joe Dispenza. I went to a Joe Dispenza week-long advanced retreat.
Okay.
And Lewis was just in the audience, dude. Like he was there as an attendee because apparently I think on one of Lewis's podcasts, Lewis had Joe on his podcast, obviously. And Joe, I think, told Lewis, like, dude, you got to come to one of my events, And so it just so happened that the event that I went to was Lewis's first ever event. He was there as just an attendee. Everybody in the whole, I mean, there's 2,200 people in the room. They all wanted to take a picture with
Right.
Lewis. And just the most humble dude. Like, I couldn't believe it.
You should see the parties he throws in Columbus, Ohio at his event.
gosh.
They're a rave. They're awesome.
I love that.
They're so awesome. But yeah, and then some of the people too, one of the guys that's not well known that has become a really good friend too is Marshall Morris. And he is like a humble dude, totally has ADHD, but I love him to death. So he runs a huge e-commerce business in California called I Heart Dogs.
Okay.
And I sold him a house in Sedona this last year. When I first met him, he's like, oh yeah, my parents live in, or his in-laws live in Cottonwood, and we go down there over Thanksgiving. So I remember taking the Can-Am from Munns down there, and we had breakfast and we connected. And then I met him up there again this year, and he's like, yeah, we found this place. I'm like, cool. So we put all the deal together. It was a seller carry, got him all dialed in on it. And then I asked him like, hey, remember when you spoke in Mastermind, you were talking about how you do your Facebook ads and like the pixels and all, like I've got these notes. I'm like, I don't even know how to dissect it, right? It's just not me. And he's like, I'm like, would you come out and do a strategy session with Garrett and I like on different things? And he's like, dude, any chance to get out of the house, come hang out with you.
Oh my gosh.
So he flew out just before Christmas and we spent 8 hours on a whiteboard with him. And the things that he came up with and the stuff. And so it's like, again, the return on investment from the people that I've been connected with and the relationships that I've built. And again, never had to do with sales.
Yeah.
Right.
So, if as soon as somebody can afford it, you would obviously recommend that they go and join a mastermind.
Yes. And look, there are masterminds that might be 3 months, try some things. Right. And I also would suggest, like, if you're going to do it, like, hey, if you talk to the person, there's an application process. Hey, can I talk to some of the people that have been in the mastermind?
Great point.
So I remember actually Lindsay Fricks at North & Co., I remember her reaching out to me and going, hey, I'm talking to Chris about the mastermind. What do you think? And I'm like, I'd love to have you and it'll be life-changing. Yeah. And she's like, I can't believe that you recommended for another local real estate agent to be in. I'm like, I'm not threatened.
Sure.
It's not about that, right? And we've become very good friends. I coached with her for a little while and helped her through some flips and those types of things. So but she called to find out. She's like, what is this? I'm like, it's life-changing as long as you don't let it be a squirrel. Look, when you get into the influencer space and you start seeing what all these people are doing, the first year I'm like, right? You're chasing things. Yeah. The next year, the new people, I'm like, listen, take notes. Do not try to apply all the things you're hearing from all these people.
For sure. Take what you like.
Yep.
Leave what you don't or can't take, and then apply it.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's got to be a tough thing. I've never actually been a part of a mastermind. I'm going to do it in 2023. I just went golfing the other day with Nick Harder. Yeah. And he was telling me about the mastermind and asking me if I wanted to be a part of it. And I'll probably either do it this year or next. I think it might already be cut off.
Yeah,
at
I
this
think
point,
it's cut off.
Yeah. But that is a big goal of mine is to do a mastermind. And I get that's probably pretty hard though to not want to take all the different things that you hear and like run a million different directions.
Right. You have to. There's something that I just recently did this really cool thing. Wendy brought this gal up, and she does this human design profile. Yep. One of the big things that came out of the human design profile was she said, you're meant to impact the world and all these other things, but you are like a circus clown with 95 spinning plates. Yeah. And she says you need to take each spinning plate and ask yourself at what cost. So you start looking at the list of ideas and you start going, okay, at what cost, right? And at what commitment? And are you really committed to that, or do you need to drop the spinning plate and focus on a couple of things? So that's kind of our big thing this year is like, if we're going to start something, at what cost and how committed are we? Yeah. Or does it need to be backburnered?
And can you see it through if you commit?
Yeah, can you see it through?
Yeah. And I think a lot of times the answer is no, even for me, and I failed miserably at that. There was a time where
High five.
Yeah, right. Well, and that's the only way we learn is by failure.
Right.
But I had a big ATM company at one point and I had a marketing agency. One day I woke up, I just shut it all down.
Right.
Said it's taken away from my real estate, And I said, I could be doing way better in real estate, but I'm busy doing all this other crap that in no way, shape, or form helps me over here.
I remember watching you on social. I'm like, now he's driving around with a bunch of cash, filling up ATMs. I'm like, what is he doing?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I'm glad I went through that.
Sure.
Because it really taught me now to do exactly what you're talking about, right? And now I'm very particular And, because I get, now as we've gotten a little bit bigger, people bring ideas and things all the time that, theoretically, they're all probably great, right? But they're not great for me.
Right.
Because I've got these different things that I do. Right now, they're all I don't want to say perfectly, but they're very well vertically integrated together.
Sure.
They all benefit each other in some capacity, right?
Right.
And if I just go start a tree cutting company, if I can't figure out how to vertically integrate it to what I'm already doing, then I'm like, how does it benefit me?
You know what? I'll speak to that very, very well. So one of the things that was a real problem when we started the construction companies back in the day was my dad decided to name everything after our last name, right? So when the painter would screw something up, you know who they would call? Me, my dad. You're like, great, we just lost $1,000 and a client because the painter screwed something up. So you start looking at the vertical integration and going, what's in my wheelhouse, right? When we learned a lot from that. When we go fast forward, I'm always looking at liabilities and what's it actually worth, right? You look at the tree trimming. I look at the construction companies, I'm like, there was no money in that. We lost so much money doing it. Now, the difference is with what Wendy's doing now is that we started a licensed contracting company. It's not named after us. And if a client wants a contractor, I'm like, hey, you can go find your own contractor. Here's my wife's information. She's licensed. This is what she does. You're welcome to call her. I don't want to hear from you. Like, if you have a complaint, you call her. Right. And she's built the subcontracting team. We've worked with the same 7 guys or the same 5 guys for the last 7 years.
Wow.
And that's her team. And that's what she does, right? So it's separated but integrated, right?
Yep.
And it works with all of our businesses. Same thing with the property management company. It all works. Right. I don't want to go out and do something that's going to take away. And I think you have to, or you should look at the time value of money when you're going to do something.
Agreed.
One of the conversations I had with Blake yesterday, because we're all doing coaching and things like that, is, which I learned from Chris, if somebody's paying you $1,000 an hour for coaching, do you think you could make more than $1,000 doing real estate? Right? Now, I love that piece, right? But you can do it either by doing group coaching or like doing that. But you have to take those into account of what's the really cost or what's the cost of it, right? What am I taking away from? Which is kind of what you went through, right?
Sure.
This is taking my time away from something that I can do better at. And if I had the time to do that, I can make it better.
Big time, yeah. Man, I love that, and I think that'll drive home with a lot of people watching and listening. Well, I know we're getting a little bit long, but just a couple more things. One is I'm always fascinated by the coaching. You do coaching now and mentorship, I believe. And when did you start doing that? Like, how is it structured, and what's the future look like for that?
Yeah. So how it started was first year Squirrel at Mastermind. Like, everybody's got a course and a thing and all this other stuff, right?
And you didn't at the time.
And I didn't.
Okay.
And everybody goes for high ticket items and all this other stuff, right? And so I wanted to create, which, God, I know so much more now than I did then, right? So I created an 8-week program, right? And I paid somebody to help me dial it in. And the reality was it just ended up coming through relationships here anyway. So we created an 8-week course. It had a booklet, all the stuff. It was done on Zoom. We did one meetup, and it was like $6,000, right? Which was taking agent to investor, right? That was kind of like my initial concept.
What was the name of it at the time? Did it have a name?
It was called the Limitless Project at the time, right?
Yep.
So we go through that, and I'm like, okay, that was great. We made a little money, and I'm like, okay, back to the drawing board, right? And so the coaching stuff kind of like just fizzled out, and we went forward, and we're doing all of our stuff, and I was so busy that I didn't do it again. And I've always wanted to. What the hard part about that stuff is finding the right people.
Sure.
Right.
Yep, big time.
And that's always the tough part. So fast forward, I don't think I was a great podcast interview. So we did the podcast for about 18 months. And I'm like, I don't know if this is a great ROI. So we're kind of like, back and forth. One of the things that Lewis Howes said at the last mastermind was YouTube will beat out any social media platform going forward, period, right?
Agreed.
Because it lives there for he's like, if I was going to spend my time, right? And of course, Lewis has a content team of this like an army.
Oh my
right?
God.
So the channels that they're creating and all the stuff that they're creating takes time. You've been building your YouTube for a while. I'm so far behind, probably because I still work with a pen and paper, right? But starting to look at what do we want to commit to, right? And when Garrett came on a year ago, we started working through things, right? And started kind of what does this look, right? So at the end of the year last year, I did group coaching, but I called it situational mentorship.
Okay.
Right? So we had anywhere between 15 and 17 people on the call every week. It was $1,000 a month. And it was really about letting them come in and letting me help them break something down in front of everybody, right? I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah.
Well, let's do this, this, and this, right? And that was great, right? But you go back to the time value of money and like, hey, how can I deliver this to the masses? So one of the things that we wanted to do, Garrett really challenged me at the end of the year is like, hey, we need to find some things that are evergreen that can constantly be making money without time.
Yep.
Right? And how do we benefit, nationally to the agents that need this information? So, we're creating like some video courses, right? And there's going to be a lot of breakdowns of things like the first and second mortgage, like that's going to be its own thing, right? It's like, hey, I can give you all the pieces of this for $99, right?
Sure.
So it's kind of evolving into that right now. The private coaching I still like to do when somebody wants to pay for it, but it's expensive, right? When it comes down to it, Chris taught me that. He's like, I make my private one-day strategy sessions so stupid that if somebody wants to pay for it, I'll do it.
Of course.
Otherwise, it's not worth my time taking away. And again, it's at what cost, right?
Agreed.
So that's kind of the evolution of it, that we're kind of going down that road. I probably at some point in time will put together a high-level mastermind. I don't know when, right? We're trying to get one thing done at a time, which Garrett's constantly telling me, stop chasing squirrels. Let's stay focused on this.
Yeah.
Which the biggest thing is like, how many more people can I impact, right? And the other thing that I learned is that not all agents are on the same scale of where they're at,
Agreed.
right? I can't take the same stuff that we talked about and teach it to a one-year agent. So they have to kind of look at different things. You start getting into wraps, creative finance, and those, and you go into the advanced type stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like how to keep it, flip it, hold it, those types of things. Because there's a strategy to it.
Agreed. Yeah. Were you at one point were an agent or a coach for the wealthy agent for Pineda? Is that still going on?
No.
Okay,
No.
Gotcha. Because he just does the wealthy investor now, or
It's Future Flipper.
or future flipper.
Yeah.
But I think I think he's like rebranding everything. I could be wrong.
That wouldn't surprise me.
What did that look like at the time? You were just one of the coaches there, or?
It was everything's about audience acquisition, right? So Ryan asked, I'm like, yeah, sure, right? It's practice, right? You're coaching people doing those things. I think what he started doing was a really great idea. I don't think it worked as well as he thought it would. And so it was like, hey, I don't want to waste everybody's time, so I think I'm just going to shut this down.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I that's probably and I think what he's doing now is probably makes a lot more sense.
Sure.
He's doing the big events, and I think he's got like the yearly thing. I think it's just like one thing.
Yeah.
It's not just like wealthy agent and then wealthy whatever. It's just like one big overarching thing.
Yep.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, man, I know we're getting a little bit long. If you had to go back and give your younger self, dude, like a piece of advice, what would that be like? And I love this question. And Lewis Howes asked it, I think, a little bit of a different way. But like, it could be anything. Relationships, business. Obviously, been married for a long time. You got through a lot of trial and tribulation there. And you've just done a lot. You've accomplished a lot. You've done big things. Like if you could just give your younger self a piece of advice that would have maybe, I don't know, helped you along the way, mentally, spiritually, whatever, what would that be?
I think early on, even though my dad was a mentor, he was great, I still would have sought out other coaches, right? Other people to mentor me. You'll understand this, some people will, is that early on, and I'm not bashing any of this, just so everybody knows this, I grew up in the First Assemblies of God church, right? And that's where we got married, and those are my beliefs and all the things. It was like this all-encompassing, like this is where you're supposed to get everything. And I believe that my dad would have been better off if he would have had some outside counsel from different people. The church is great, but, I found that like there's a combination of things, right? And I think that I would have sought out some different mentors. Like my dad was teaching me one thing, but what about somebody that, I mean, my biggest thing, honestly, is like I wish in my 20s I was more financially literate and I would have like had a financial literacy coach, like just something, right? So that you kind of started to understand money rather than learning through the Braille method. Because unfortunately my parents weren't great with money, right? I mean, they were like the prime example of real estate roller coaster, right? They spent what they made all the time, right? And so, I even asked my mom at freaking Thanksgiving a couple of years ago, I'm like, did you and dad ever have any reserves? She's like, nope, never, right? So you're always chasing it, right? And so I wish there would have been a better planning system for me and some mentorship, on that side.
almost like to summarize, I guess, too, like what, like, and this is something I've talked a lot about, right? It's like, there's going to be different coaches and different people you have in your life for different reasons. And in a lot of ways, and I've gone through this where like somebody will be a really great coach in business that I would never take relationship advice from them.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Or I might have a great relationship or marriage coach, or somebody's doing maybe premarital counseling. I'm engaged, my fiance.
Oh, yeah, congratulations.
And thank you. And that person might be really great in that area, but they would be a terrible business coach. Right. And then both those people might be a terrible fitness coach. Like they might be, I've got a guy maybe who's out of shape, but he's great in the relationship game, right? And he's not going to teach me how to do the bench press, right? And so, man, I think you're dead on with that.
Have you ever heard the story 2 Feet from Gold?
I don't think I have.
So, story my dad used to tell, but he never finished the story, and I don't know that he never read the end of it or didn't get it all out of it. Right? I think he stopped at chapter 1 and didn't go to chapter 2. So there was a story about this family in California, right? They struck gold, they moved their family out, they bought all the stuff, right? They're digging, they're making money. The vein runs out, okay? It stops, right? They can't find it, they're digging all over the place, blah, blah. So they just give up. They sell all the equipment, the land, everything for pennies on the dollar to some other guy. You know what their mistake was? They were just digging around, not knowing anything. The guy that buys it hires a geologist to track the vein. That's all they needed was the wisdom of a specialist
of where to
track
dig
the vein and where to dig. So the story is they were 2 feet from gold. They were just digging in the wrong direction.
Wow.
Right? My dad would always tell, I'm not going to quit because we're 2 feet from gold. I'm like, yeah, but you're digging in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is I didn't read the rest of that story until after he had passed, or else I'd be like, Dad, you see this? Because we used to have this business advisor that was telling us to shut all the construction companies down. My dad would use that story every time. We're 2 feet from gold. I can feel it. I'm like, okay, well, the guy that has the wisdom that we hired told us to get off it. We're not 2 feet from gold. We're going the wrong direction.
Yeah.
So that's like a really great story, is like, no matter what you're doing, you're always should be learning.
Yeah.
Always from somebody else that's smarter than you. And like you said, you're going to have different coaches coming in and out of life, right? And I've got multiple different coaches, right?
Sure.
And I think that that's really, really important.
Very valuable, yeah. And even having a mastermind or whatever you're part of, I'm sure there's people in a mastermind, you probably get the best of every world, because you got people in there that are great at all different walks of life, and you can really learn from everybody.
So I'll give this piece of advice. Ashley Woodridge, the head pastor of CCV, said this once, right? He coaches with John Maxwell once a quarter. Okay. And this is really cool. He says, you don't have to pay somebody for this. He said, if you have 3 or 4 people or a couple of people and you call them, you say, hey, will you mentor me for a half an hour once a quarter? And you go prepared and you send them 5 questions beforehand and you don't waste hours of their time and you just want to get some answers to life. He says, I guarantee you people will do it for you. So you think about that like, hey, I just need a half an hour, an hour of your time once a quarter.
Yeah.
And then you're really prepared to not waste their time. And I think a lot of people, they want, like I said, the picking your brain, and then they're all over the place and nothing truly gets accomplished in that meeting.
Dude, you could even I just, while you were saying that, I thought like you could give the person giving the advice like an opportunity to like get content out of it. It's like, hey, I'll send you the questions in advance. It'll take a half hour. Get a camera on you. And while you're giving me the advice, like turn it into like dope content, right? And then it's like kind of the best of both worlds. Like you see like the real Brad Lee, where he's like giving the advice, right? Yeah, he's an interesting guy, right?
Yeah.
And but where like half the time I'm like, is he even talking to anybody, or is it?
We do that all the time.
Does it just look like he's talking?
Right.
But that would be a good way you could do it too.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Steve, where can people find you if they're trying to get a hold of you and maybe get advice from you or pay you to coach, mentor, whatever they want to buy a house or?
So right now on Instagram, it's at I am Steve D Valentine, and that's pretty much the best place to reach out to me. I mean, so my staff can kind of go through the messages and plug people in where they need to go. So that's where all my real estate content is, and that's really the content that we're putting out specifically for agents to help them be better and kind of go through that process. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'll put all your information down below in the description of every platform. And dude, I just appreciate you being on the show, man.
Absolutely. I appreciate the time. It was awesome. Thank you.
If you're still watching, really appreciate it. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you drop a comment, subscribe, smash the like button if you haven't already. And if you're watching on any other platform, we'd greatly appreciate a 5-star review. Make sure you go check out Steve, and appreciate you, and we'll see you in the next episode.